Hello, you're welcome to our podcast today. My name is Kathryn Ann Clark, and we are so happy you're listening with us. You're here with us. Thank you for joining us. Now I'm going to jump right in with a story. I want to tell you a story about an old farmer and his wife. Let's call him an older farmer and his wife. Now, why do I tell farm stories? Because we're part of the farming community. So it's kind of where a lot comes from for us. So there's this farmer and his wife, and they're trying to have a baby, as many people are, and it's just not happening for them. And if you have a farm, especially in those days, this was in the past, children are important because they really do help. And the more hands, the better when you have a farm, especially in certain seasons and times where the workload increases. It didn't happen for them. So they resolved and got on with it. They had a lovely marriage and a wonderful life together. But then one day, the wife finds that she's expecting a baby, much to the absolute surprise. After all of these years, I think she was 48 and it was a first pregnancy, something like that. I could be wrong about the numbers, but I remember the names. So time goes by, the baby comes. In those days, Dad isn't in the room. So the first time he sees his daughter, a little girl, is after she's delivered and she's laying in a bassinet next to the mother in the hospital. So the father goes in, looks at the infant, and he is so shocked. He says, "Oh, she's adorable." Based on that, the mother was so pleased with his absolute delight and adoration of the little girl that they named the baby Adora. Now, Adora went on to be adored her whole life, as you can imagine. She was the joy of this couple, and she blossomed in that love. My friends, the father's love for his daughter never diminished. Has our love diminished for the people around us in this way? I don't think that couple ever took for granted the fact that they had a beautiful daughter of their own because they wanted to be with this little child for so long. They wanted a child for so long. In our own relationships, we sometimes fall back from the decision to love another person. You know, it's really easy when you have children, I think, to love them throughout. That love is kind of straightforward and it's easier to hold it. But with love between, say, siblings for sure, and let's say love between a married couple, often that love, how you love, is a decision. And it's a decision that must be made. I mean, you have to say, how am I going to love this person? And when you love someone and the relationship is healthy enough, you bring the best out of yourself. You bring the best out of the other person. Love brings the best of everyone to the table. Now, if somebody really doesn't love you and they're using you and you're lavishing love upon them because you want to be loved in return, well, that's never going to go anywhere. That's probably not a good direction for your love or the fierceness of your love. And it's not prudent because people have a right to determine how they're loved and what feels okay for them and what doesn't. My point is, sometimes I've seen this where people are withholding. And I wanted to say stingy. Now, why didn't I use the word stingy? That is making me laugh. I didn't want to use that word because it's such a great word. It's like I'm giving, but not really. And I resent the fact that I have to give. So I'm going to give in a limited way. And you're going to really know most communication, 90% of communication is nonverbal, remember. So people kind of know what you're thinking, even if you're not saying it. But some people give in a stingy way. And some people, I've seen them, they give where they're like, I'm giving because I'm good, not because you're lovable. Now, and then how do they feel? Well, I'm certainly not worthy of your love. You're only loving because you're better than me. I mean, because I'm calling this hypocrisy. Someone has to do it. It may as well be me. You know, they're acting like you're actually the biggest burden God ever blew breath into. Have you ever felt like that? That someone is treating you like, I'm doing this for you because I'm a good person, but you are a nuisance. If you're like me, you're sitting here thinking, gosh, I hope I never made anyone feel like that. And yet I'm sure I have. So there you go. This is us. This is broken humanity. I think the love between spouses is tougher, obviously, than parent-child, because parent-child, there's no question who has the power. The parent has the power. In relationships between couples, there can be power struggles, communication difficulties. If you think about it, you take one person from one unrepeatable family with all that goes on there, then you take someone from another household, another unrepeatable family, and all that went on there. You put them in the same house. We call it marriage. And it's going to be lively because there are programs running in each other's heads that you know nothing about. You can't know. And I see couples sometimes who are so casual about the other person, and the familiarity has bred contempt. Like they know everything there is to know about the other person, and frankly, it's not that interesting and it's not impressive. And that's not very nice. And that is what I'm talking about. That's the piece. And the thing is that if you love someone like that and what you're actually communicating is you're not very lovable, well, the person is going to look less and less lovable because they don't feel loved. When you're in a family, when someone walks out the door, how do they walk out the door? How are they facing the world? They should know they're loved. They should walk out the door saying, I'm a person who's loved. Because frankly, my friends, it's written all over them. You see people and they look like they're living with someone who doesn't love them. I mean, you can have doubts about your marriage and still be loving and make sure the person knows, I love you and you are lovable. And the problems that we have are problems, but there are two of us in them. And however it ends, it ends. If it's a marriage, hopefully we have hope for the marriage, the relationship, especially if there's children involved. My point is, again, the answers aren't outside of you. They're inside of you. We have to be contemplatives. We have to be thoughtful men and women, hopefully thoughtful men and women who are aware of God, because then we can take responsibility for what we're putting out. I mean, people can put out to other people, like say, communicate the most unkind messages, and they're so surprised when what comes back has been informed by that. What is that capacity for denial? It's a capacity to be absolutely detached from taking responsibility for what's coming back to you in life. I heard a young woman telling a story, and she was talking about a time in her life that was really difficult. Now, she wasn't talking about it anyway, just, oh, that was when this was happening. Oh, yeah. And then she paused and she thought for a moment and she said, yeah, that was a really hard time for me. I was not at my best. That was very difficult. Now, I think people would have noticed that she wasn't at her best in that time, and I think people would have understood. The pressure on her was immense. And she did her best. Everybody survived in her family. And that kind of introspection comes from thoughtful reflection. It comes from prayer. It comes from a desire for self-awareness to say, what actually happened during those years? And she was able to look back compassionately on herself and say, those were really hard for me, those years, and I didn't look my best. And that's sad for me. And yet I'm a survivor of it. That's how it looks for all of us. And my concern for us is that because we're not doing this introspection, we're not doing this contemplation, people are carrying a lack of awareness about their low self-esteem. Like they don't know the origin of it. They don't know where it came from. This young woman was able to look back and say, that was the hardest time in my life. It wasn't elegant, but I survived. And I, as best I could, hit my duties. All of this talking is separating us from the very real need to have compassion for ourselves. Example, that little Adora, that little baby, she's adorable. My friends, when you were a little baby, you were laying somewhere wrapped up in blankets, nice and clean, and someone looked at you and said, oh, he's gorgeous. She's beautiful. I'm crazy about this baby. You are the same baby today. You're the same person. That's how God loves you. That's how you need to love yourself. You need to get a kick out of yourself. You're not the best. You're not the worst. You're somewhere in the middle like me. I mean, we're all just people. So I think it would be helpful if everybody looked back on their life and maybe there's a time that you're not proud of or that you didn't look your best. I mean, everybody kind of has one, I think. I mean, it's if you're a human being. And you can look back on that and you can wonder with yourself and be honest and say, yeah, I did some things I'm not proud of. And what was going on for me? Why was I that way? What was happening for me? And I think you'll find the reasons, like this woman did. She was able to say, I didn't look good there. I wasn't, but it was so hard for me. And then when you look at yourself and determine, let it drop down what the real difficulties were, then you'll have compassion for yourself and you'll have understanding. And really, then you stop repeating. That's the time when you stop making the same mistakes, because you say, okay, when I feel like this is what I do. And that is unhelpful and I feel worse. So you're going to have to allow yourself to rest in the fact that you're adorable. God's crazy about you and stares at you for all your potential, not your mistakes. God isn't like that. He stares at you, close to you, willing you to experience your goodness. Know how good you are. You actually have extraordinary virtue, extraordinary love, capacity to help other people. Your position, your placement, your presence on the planet is important to somebody. And at some point in your life, it's going to be crucial. You will become a crucial presence for somebody else. Perhaps you already have. I'm sure you have. If you're like most people, you'll have no awareness of how much you helped somebody, how important you were. You could have been a lifesaver to somebody physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, spiritually. The fact that you were on the planet was crucial. It counted. Your presence counted. So you have to love yourself. You have to allow yourself to love yourself. And remember, there are people who need help. Look at the good thief. I'm thinking about Christ on the cross. And I'm thinking about the good thief. That's an oxymoron, isn't it? The good thief. Someone who steals. And the adjective is good. The good thief. Fun. I love it. I actually love it because everyone in prison has their stories. And the mistakes I've made, I had reasons for. You're probably like me. So this good thief would have had reasons. Anyway, here he is, condemned to death. He's on a cross. He's dying. They've decided, you're so bad, we're not even going to let you live. Your life is going to be terminated. It's a heck of a judgment. And yet, he's raised up there on the cross. He's the only one, arguably, on the planet who was in a position to give Christ that ultimate comfort. Saying, will you remember me? I recognize you as king. Christ is condemned. They all hate him so much. It's all lies. Just like today, there's so many lies floating around. None of us really know what's happening if we're being honest. Any certainty is embarrassing, frankly, right now. But this Christ up there on the cross, only God could have arranged this, where this man is in a position to say, this man is a king. I see who you are. I recognize you. I recognize you. And what greater comfort could there have been for Jesus Christ, put to death for being so bad, than to have somebody say, no, I know you're a king. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. It's kind of the most beautiful thing I've ever thought of before. The good thief was uniquely positioned to comfort the king, our king. How did he get there? Quite obviously, he's a saint. That's a whole other conversation, isn't it? The saints among us aren't the ones we expect them to be, and the ones we expect them to be aren't saints. So funny. It's so amusing when we are stretched in our thinking. Now, how did I get on that? I'm thinking about you and how important you are to people and how loved you are by God. And I'm thinking about baby Adora, whose father if you're with someone who doesn't love you or can't love you or there's a problem, you just have to make sure that you get filled up in your love of Christ. When you say, I don't know what that's like. I recently was talking to someone who has had no faith formation, no exposure to religion or spirituality or God or whatever. And so I asked, what would you like to know about God? And she said, well, I'd like to know if he's in the same galaxy. And I thought, okay. I said, what if someone told you that God was with you? And she said, well, that would be terrifying. I don't think I could handle that. Okay, so clearly transcendence hasn't been communicated in another way. We really take for granted the extent of the formation that we've been given when we look at people who lack any. I mean, and she had different formation in different ways that, where we didn't get it. I get that. It's a different culture. But I said, but what if God was close to you and he just loved you? He just adored you. He just loved you. She said, I think that would be hard to believe because isn't God really the one who's, noticing everything that you're getting wrong? And I thought, well, okay, we would hate to think that that's what they think about Christianity, but let's put our hands up because that's what we're telling them. That's what we're obsessed with is sin. And I think the people who have transcended that thinking live without worrying too much about sin. And they've also stopped engaging with sin, but keenly aware of their interpersonal mistakes or where impatience can take them or, selfishness or any of those things. It doesn't become about sin anymore. It's not about the rules of the game. It's just about love. I think that we could do better in how we communicate Christianity. But my mind keeps going back to the good thief. Okay, here's why I think. Blessed are the people who recognize your essence when you're looking your worst. There are times when we're looking our worst, and yet someone will say, you'll be fine. You're really good at this, and this would be hard for anyone. And suddenly, it all blows away, and you know who you are again. Somebody mirrors us back from our whole timeline, and not just this moment in time where we're feeling our worst or feeling we've made big mistakes or whatever it is. You've all had the moments where splat, you land on your face. We all do. This is part of our life. It's how we learn, like that baby walking. That's what the good thief did for Christ. He said, you've been made to look like a bad thing, but you're not a bad thing. You are a good thing. You are the best thing. Okay, that's what he said to Christ. And Christ then died really in his dignity. Not that anyone could remove his dignity, but his dignity was humanly conferred upon him and recognized by the person next to him who was also being put to death and crucified. So don't ever think that you're not in a position to offer this kind of dignity on another person. I will talk about prisons and some of the experiences I've had in there, not as an inmate, but as a person who went to help. You're always in a position to help other people. You're always in a position to look at someone and mirror them back in dignity. And I've heard people say, oh, no one cares what I think. Why would I bother? Everyone cares what you think if you can look at someone truthfully and be loving. Everyone's craving love. And it's so true. I think you'll remember this. Maybe you've had this experience where the person you least expected comes to you in a time of need and gets that job done. Says, this is who you are. This is who you are. And it lands for you. And you say, boy, out of the mouths of babes or from the least expected direction, I get the greatest wisdom that could be offered to me. And that was Christ on the cross and the good thief. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.